Most recently, the word enlightenment or 启蒙 in Chinese came to my mind a lot while I was researching and pondering. People generally would relate this word to Western influence, but what about getting enlightenment from understanding better about Asia's deep past? On today's show, our cross-cultural expert is Dr. Donald Lewis, professor and consultant who has taught in several most distinguished universities in the world. He is widely regarded as a leading expert on Chinese law, Chinese and international dispute resolution, and international trade and economic law. He regularly provides legal advice to international law firms, investment banks, multinational corporations, governments, and the One Belt, One Road related stakeholders. Well, he's here today to not talk about his work experience, but something deeper that he has to open our mind. From him, we gained an intriguing look into Asia's past to find the light of hope in getting all humanity to work together for creating a better future. And of course, cultures and civilizations are both huge topics, and we understand we might not be able to cover everything Dr. Lewis is able to share in this limited time. But we'll try our best and may even come back to him for more views in the future episodes. So now, without further ado, I'm Ying Li. Welcome to today's show on how China works.
Well, we are very pleased to welcome to the show today Professor Donald Lewis. Don, how are you today?
Oh, very good. And thank you, both Brendan and Ying for having me on the show.
We're very glad
to have you here.
Absolutely. And we would like to start, of course, with if you could, assume you met someone at a conference or a party, but they had not yet heard you speak or you had not met them previously, and you just wanted to give someone the short 30 to 60 second a hot take on you, kind of the bio and the key points. How would you introduce yourself to this person who you wanted to actually speak to and get to know?
Right. Well, I suppose I could start by telling the person that I'm a multicultural American attorney and law professor, and I've lived and worked in Asia, mainly Greater China, for a quarter of a century. I'm fortunate to have acquired many memorable cross-cultural experiences during my life and career. Professionally, I've taught and lectured at the law schools of Peking University, the China University of Political Science and Law, the University of International Business and Economics, Tsinghua, Nankai, and Zhongshan universities, in other words, all over China, and I had the privilege of being a professor for 23 years at the University of Hong Kong Faculty of Law. Mm-hmm. Since returning to California, which I did in 2009, I have taught at Stanford Law School and the University of San Francisco School of Management. I'm also an associate member of a law firm in London, England, Brooke Chambers. And over the last few years, my work has very much focused on China's monumental Belt and Road Initiative, Yidai Yilu, which has opened up really, for me, vast new vistas regarding our collective cultural heritage. I should mention, too, that I'm married. I have a wife. She's a Filipina. My four sons are all what are called TCKs, third culture kids. Mm-hmm. Yes, having been born and raised in Hawaii, Hong Kong, and on the mainland of China.
Those are some lucky kids. That's quite a family and a career. Obviously, you have. Well, Don, we like to think we don't take ourselves too seriously, so we like to start with fairly easy questions. Let me start with this. Given your background in extensive knowledge of history and the law and politics and finance, what would you say are the missing links between East and West civilization when it comes to building a common future together? So that's my world's longest ironic setup. But in terms of East and West cooperating, what do you think are the missing gaps along this bridge, and how do you think we can resolve this, and what does the future look like?
Yes, a very simple question. Thank you.
Sure. We thought we'd start with the softball. Favorite colors next, just to let you know.
But it is indeed a profound question, and one that is likely to have very substantial repercussions for both the East and the West, for China, Asia, and the West in the years to come. I think first it's worth noting that the Chinese are apt to describe international relations as exchanges between civilizations. As you probably know, this is rarely done in contemporary Western discourse. But I do think that the Chinese approach is correct. We should be thinking in terms of civilization zones, which also demarcate different socio-cultural systems. Several of these exist. In other words, we can and should break down generic Western and Eastern civilization into actual civilization zones. In the course of my research, I would say that Eastern civilization includes three major ancient zones: China, Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia, and Greater India. What may be called Wu, Sunda, and Bhairata. My own view is that the three civilizations of Asia that I've just mentioned over millennia developed a different approach to international relations than the modern West. Each of the three Asian civilizations respected the independence and autonomy of the other zones, with well-defined borders and littoral buffer areas. In other words, there were no major impediments to trade and cultural, technological interchange.
Right.
Certainly, for the most part, there were no customs duties, anti-dumping or anti-subsidy duties, TBT regulations. In other words, free trade prevailed. In this sense, the civilizations were borderless. Nonetheless, political boundaries remained in place and were respected. In fact, when we look at Asia today, we can still see the outlines of these same basic civilization boundaries that existed in very ancient antiquity. Moreover, China's imperial tributary state system, which is China's own distinctive model of international relations, exemplified this approach, in that smaller states, such as those in Southeast Asia, were never annexed or conquered. In other words, international relations were consensual, not coerced.
Right.
Now, I think, too, that it's worth bearing in mind President Xi's formulation of a community of shared humanity or common destiny, and that this is not only a correct viewpoint, but a deeply profound one. It reiterates the ancient Asian approach to inter-civilization relations, and remarkably, with the reopening of the Silk Roads, this reveals deep sub-strata of civilizations and exchanges which stretch far back in time. It shows how constructive and cooperative our more noble ancestors were, how we did in fact practice a community of shared humanity and common destiny. Uncovering such substrata, such missing links, as you put it, will demonstrate that we, the East and the West, have been positively interacting, accreting a shared human civilization for many thousands of years. That we actually have a great deal in common.
And how do you think we bring that back into consciousness, though? This is something that I've been really aware of, and you're familiar with the show as we spoke offline. So, Inge and I, we're not straight interviews. We do offer our experience, such as benefits the conversational point, as an example. As a expat, and Inge has been an expat in the U.S. and other countries, this is something I'm aware of whenever, and from being an expat for so long, that you're aware of being part of a global community. But it seems that people who aren't fortunate to travel or don't travel, or travel and have bad experiences, don't find that same sense of commonality. I mean, do you have any ideas about how we might, bridge those gaps?
Absolutely. I'd like to provide one brief historical example, which might help in terms of awakening, the interest of, Americans and Europeans. It's generally overlooked, and indeed what I would call a Camino moment, that ancient Europeans were, in fact, deeply involved in the development and operation of the Silk Road trade. And that the Silk Road trade, in fact, dates back long before the Han Dynasty, unlike what is typically mentioned in the scholarship. And in Bactria, now Afghanistan, and west of Xinjiang, there were groups of Indo-Europeans, including the Tocharians, and they were part of what was called the Wager Confederacy. The Tocharian mummies of the Tarim Basin have been dated back to at least 2,500 BCE. The Tocharians appear to have spoken a Celtic language and were China traders. They brought Celtic musical instruments such as the arhu, or Irish fiddle, to China. The Tocharians were, from my perspective, the front edge of a bridge from ancient Celtic Europe, which met the Chinese bridge from the east in the Tarim Basin. The Tocharians also maintained close relations with North India, or what in fact is still called Aryavata. Over hundreds of years, the Tocharians founded cities in Central Asia, most notably Samarkand, and eventually formed the Kushan, or Guishan, Empire, which was composed of some 26 city-states dedicated to the Silk Road trade, which included not only China, but India and Persia as well. The Kushans were the intermediaries of the Silk Road between Han China and the Roman Empire. The famous Han ambassador, Jian Qian, in fact, visited them. The wonders of China, silk, porcelain, and much more, made their way to Europe via the Kushans. Likewise, it was the Kushans who first brought Buddhism to China. This underscores how deep the relations between the Europeans and the Chinese really are. Actually, they're much, much deeper. Have you ever wondered why both Celtic Wales in Britain and China have as their national symbols the dragon?
Why is that?
Or why and let me continue, or why the harvest festival of the U.S., Britain, and Ireland, Halloween, has jack-o'-lanterns, much like the Chinese lanterns of Mid-Autumn Festival? These are things to ponder about. I have my own views on those, and indeed they relate back to what I've said about the deep substrata of relations, the inter-civilization relations, particularly those involving the so-called three civilizations of Asia. And we could go into that if you would like. But what this underscores really is there are these remarkable shared links. They're not being focused upon by current scholars.
Why are there so many barriers from your perspective actually preventing scholars paying really real attention on this perspective, like this bridging East and West, and finding the trees back then to get the real information?
Because it runs counter to the contemporary scholarship, which, from my perspective, to be quite frank, is politically motivated. So we have certain narratives that are being put forward as to the origins of human civilization, which are in fact threatened by, for example, what appears to me to be clear, that these three great civilizations of Wu, Sunda, and Bhairata, and by the way, India to this day is still called Bhairata, these three civilizations are really the fundamental home of human civilization. This runs counter to the viewpoint that has been maintained throughout the 20th century, that Sumeria in the deserts of the Middle East is where all human civilization began. Now, I think this is clearly not the case. But by saying this, and by just shifting focus a little bit to the east, you then encounter the dynamism of three great civilizations. You see?
So I guess
there is that dimension too. Yeah.
Right. That also mean one of the barriers is because of the global voice right now hasn't really shifted yet, so that many truths couldn't be revealed or something like that.
Indeed. There's a lot of political capital invested in having the Middle East as the home of human civilization. But, when you look at it, it really doesn't make a great deal of sense. I mean, why would somewhere that's basically extremely arid, with poor conditions, generally speaking, for farming, for animal husbandry. There are no forests at all. And indeed, if you go back in time, there wasn't really access to the sea. Why would that be the center of human civilization when, in fact, what we would, from a common sense perspective, understand is that human civilization will normally, as we see even today, tend to arise along coastlines and in established river valleys that have, plentiful water, forests, green pastures, and things of that sort. That certainly is not true for the Middle East. So, this is something that will have to be addressed. I should point out there is a fourth civilization too, and I think I've mentioned this to you. I mean, the fourth civilization is actually the ancient Mediterranean civilization, and that civilization was a pan-Mediterranean civilization, which was much more important than the Middle East, and indeed had relations with the three Asian civilizations. So I call that civilization Tethys. But these are major changes. These will involve huge shifts for us in terms of our thinking. But I think they are inevitable, because this is revealing what is, our collective heritage, our collective past. And indeed, it's a wonderful heritage, really, if you think about it.
And Professor Lewis, so you touched on a few very important points regarding that barriers, actually. So from your perspective, what are the resources or tools or even maps, channels do you recommend for our audience, including myself, worldwide, who care about being more sensible scholar or someone, a wise person who won't really dig deeper, understanding to be equipped with that cultural intelligence?
Yeah, how can you use it in a practical way if someone's not a not a deep scholar or a profound thinker on this topic? What are some actionable things?
Let me put my question in a much more simpler way, actually. What I really want to say here is, how could we start to provide a little light in the dark tunnel, for people to be able to see that perspective, see that hope, so that people will be equipped with that drive to understand that's really, really important. So they would generate the inner motives to really to be able to uncover that, to find that is super, super important, super relevant to our future, right? That's what I truly want to know.
Well, I think what we need to do is just look at the cultures and civilizations. I mean, I'm afraid that a lot of this has been generated without, a lot of the thinking on civilizations was generated really in the 19th century as part of, the European imperial expansion. And there were contesting views, particularly, amongst certain scholars, certain groups in Europe at the time. But that was, that was a very incomplete knowledge of these regions and cultures. We have come a long way since then. I mean, we have, for example, we have aerial photography now, and we can even see what's underneath the surface of the sea. We have a lot more. There's been a lot more archaeological work that's been done. So, and the linguistic studies have advanced substantially. So, all of that means that there is now a lot of information available that wasn't available in the 19th century, which is when all of these views sort of crystallized and then became sort of set in stone in the 20th century. So I think for the common, for the lay person that isn't a deep scholar, I think all they need to do is sort of look around. I mean, if they're outside of the United States, because of course we're a news society here, but if you're in Europe, you can see this. If you're in India, you clearly can see it. The Indians have been writing about it, but nobody's listening. And then the Chinese see it. So there's simply that dimension to it. But I do have some suggestions. I mean, I think that people should be looking at maps. I think that, when you look at the maps of the Silk Roads, for example, you can see the connections. You can see the connections. For example, you can see the connections between, India and Southeast Asia and China. You can see the connections along the Silk Road to Persia and to the Mediterranean. But what they don't show you, and again, this is another what I call Camino moment, they don't show you the connections to Europe.
Right.
Which is like, it's unbelievable. Just like there's very little scholarship that is being put forward on, what was going on in Northern Europe for thousands of years in Celtic and Germanic Europe. It's all just focused on the Mediterranean, and of course that's not the case. So there are deep connections actually that go right across the Silk Road from China, from India to Europe. And then the question arises: why would people in Europe really even care? And the fact of the matter, the reason they care is because they used to be in the region. They used to be in Asia. And then they migrated. These were great migrations.
Right.
So, and that's why they wanted to maintain the connections that they had previously had, not only with India, but also very importantly with China. And that's why we see this symbolism coming down through the ages. We see Wales, for example, still having the dragon. We have in Britain, Ireland, the U.S., Halloween. We see these festivals which show a common heritage. I mean, it's much deeper, too. If we had more time to talk about festivals, it's quite remarkable, really. But the point is that these are the symbols, the signs of these connections, and that we were at one time all together in Asia. So this is what needs to be done. So looking at maps will help you do that. Looking at maps of the ancient world of Eurasia will do that. And I would point out that there are many secrets about the modern world that are hidden in the sands and the steppes of Central Asia. I would also point out that in order to understand more about ancient Europe and China, as well as cultural interactions along the Silk Roads, there are a number of books that one can look at. That are important in this regard. I mean, one of the great Chinese historians, one of the great Chinese of all time, is Sima Qian, who
Sima Qian.
That's right. Who the records of the grand historian, right? And moreover, when you even get later in time to the romance of the Three Kingdoms, for example, you can see that one of those states was Wu. Right, so that it's still a continuation. Right? That's right. There's still a continuation of Wu, even then. And of course, we know to this day the Wu people are the people of Shanghai, Suzhou, and have a significant presence, and indeed are extremely intelligent people in and around the area of Shanghai and Jiangsu and Zhejiang. So, but in any case, those are sources one can look at. One can look at the Rigveda, which is the oldest of the sacred books of Hinduism, which talk about migrations. They talk about they're talking about typically the people of northern India, those of Aryavata, and that this may, in fact, indeed, include, and we do know that the Europeans were in India. The question is when. But I would suggest that it goes back a long way, because all of the Indo-European languages, whether you're talking, Irish, whether you're talking about German, whether you're talking about Italian, Greek, they are all predicated on Sanskrit, right? Mm-hmm. They are all predicated on Sanskrit, which of course is the Indian language, the mother language. So doesn't that tell you something?
Well, it does.
And indeed,
go ahead, please.
Yeah, and indeed to this day, of course, Sanskrit is an official national language of India, and is the basis for Hindi, which is spoken in North India. So we have those but I recommend the Rigveda to know more about what was going on, in terms of trying to move the dial back, as it were. I recommend the Welsh Mabinogion, which is one of the most ancient works of literature in Europe. And along with those are the Irish sagas, the Finn cycle and others. And then the Greek Titanomachy. This is about the wars between the Olympian gods and the Titans. But it's actually a picture into the past in terms of the legends regarding the Tethyan civilization of the Mediterranean that was encountered by the Greeks. So I think those are very interesting as well. If one wants to get more knowledge, yes, if one wants to get more knowledge about, for example, civilizations, religions in ancient times, a fabulous multi-volume work that was done in the early 20th century is a compilation by Sir James Fraser, The Golden Bough, which has had major impacts in terms of archaeology and scholarship. So I think that's important. Joseph and Civilization in China, I think, is an extremely important historical work, tracing all the Chinese inventions and the Chinese approach to science, the influences of both Taoism and Confucianism on the development of Chinese science, and of course we have repercussions of this. We have echoes of this in the West. Taoism shares many similarities, quite frankly, with Celtic Druidism. So, that is fascinating. Of course, Fung Shui,
yeah.
Which in China, of course, is extremely well known, and but this was practiced also in ancient Celtic Europe, and indeed, I would say even in Tethyan Europe, in the Mediterranean civilization. So this was known. This was shared between the civilizations. You will note that in Britain, for example, or Ireland, you find, in Britain you find Stonehenge, but you also find other stone circles. You find standing stones. You find, and these are predicated on what the ancients called ley lines. These are energy lines in the earth. But both the Chinese and the Europeans shared these views. So So there's a lot here to look at.
Well, I want to jump in on that because I would not pretend, of course, to be an academic myself, and I'm familiar with about half the titles you mentioned. Can't claim to have read any in depth, but I have a reading list that will take me into my dotage. But it does prompt me because you mentioned the parallels between East and West and things having to do, the symbolism that's traceable and shows us these common origins. And I'm familiar, for instance, with, basically the ancient solar symbol of essentially a circle, but how that has been traced at its arrival in different places and how its use in symbolic language. And, this is all fairly specific and heady and comprehensive and, deeply academic stuff to really study. Do you know of anyone, or it sounds like perhaps you're working on your unified field theory of this and how it applies to the present day? I'm wondering, has someone done something in contemporary writing, in contemporary language, who's sort of summing this up? It's quite a task, but it sounds like you would be the person to do this, or perhaps if I've missed this in your bibliography, I apologize, but has anyone done sort of a all-in-one volume, connecting the dots, or do you think that's still like the great work that's left to do here? Because I would love to start there, and then obviously dig deeper.
I am not aware of anyone who has done this nor put forward this hypothesis. In fact, what we see again, which is a bit disconcerting, is that we see very strange, distracting hypotheses being put forward.
Right.
For example, for the origin of the Indo-Europeans. When in fact you say, well, it has Indo there, so that might tell you something. But placing the origin of the Indo-Europeans in the Kurgan plateau and in the steppes, which remembering that. At the time of the Ice Age, most of these areas were unlivable. So, it's like, why would we be there? This is actually being put forward. I have to point out too that previously the hypothesis that was put forward was that the Europeans were from the Caucasus.
Right.
And of course, that's been rejected. That's been discarded in favor of this silly Kurgan hypothesis, which is predicated on the fact that there are tumuli or mounds, burial mounds, found in Central Asia. That's hardly a basis for reaching a conclusion that Europeans come from that area. So, whereas there's a huge body of knowledge, a huge body of evidence that the Europeans actually were based in northern India. So, and of course, that is a wonderful thing because that then puts us in the three civilizations of Asia, having participated for thousands of years with the Chinese, with the Southeast Asians, with the Indians, not just of North India, who are cousins, but also those of South India, of Dravidia. So, isn't that a wonderful prospect?
Well, do you think? Do you think this is? Is the simple shorthand of politics the explanation why, in your opinion, or what do you think is behind? I'm sure it's case by case. There would be differences, but what do you think is behind what would seem to be obvious disinformation in some cases?
That's right.
Yeah. Could I ask you to? I don't know how much you want to chat about this on a microphone, but I'd be curious to talk to you and know what you really think.
I think it's better if we talk about it in person.
Copy that.
Because it is
hashtag mainland.
Yeah, hashtag absolutely. Because
we do this a lot.
I do view this as political
sure.
to a large extent, and of course it is somewhat disconcerting to people.
Yeah.
But we can't ignore history. We can't ignore the evidence, and there is actually a wonderful story behind all of this, because it is our human story. But again, I don't know of any I don't know of any major piece of scholarship that has attempted to put forward what I'm suggesting, and that's what I'm working on.
Okay,
so,
that's what we want to hear. We want you to write this
right.
book for us, and I'm trying to tell you, make it, dumb it down a shade, Doc. I need to be able to read this.
Right. And I would point out too. I mean, that there are other books, but I mean, the point is that there's really nothing that has attempted to do this in a comprehensive, integrated manner. And I think it's because, quite frankly, there are very few people that have actually spent. In my case, I've spent 25 years in Asia and Greater China. I've also spent time in Europe, we have the advantages in our generation or generations, to be able to do these things, to travel and
right.
and be fit into cultures and learn from them and then be able to extract ourselves and sort of take a more stratospheric view of what's going on.
Right.
But this is something really that can happen now.
Well, you're working on this, and we wouldn't ask you to, of course, spoil your own work, right? I'm wondering, and given, as you just mentioned, the political realities of the way we should speak about this in this venue, all of that withstanding, I'm wondering if you could indicate what you think what area would one of the big revelations be? I mean, what sorts of implications, what sectors would you see it affecting the most? I'm trying to be vague yet specific for you. I don't know if I'm succeeding.
Okay. It's a great question, actually, Brendan. What's important here, of course, is the interaction between our cultures and civilizations, that we have a track record here. So, we should, because our forebears, we should be able to work, not just get along, but work dynamically and effectively. I think there was a lot of inter-civilization exchange going on between the three civilizations that I have just described as Wu, Sunda, and Beirata. In other words, China, basically southern and eastern China, Southeast Asia, or Sundaland, because of course much of Sunda was previously above water, and then northern and southern India. So, there was a tremendous amount of interchange going on between these civilizations, and I mean it's when you look at population densities, where do you find the most people in the world? You find them in these sources of civilization, right? So that's where you find. So, that's another smoking gun, another footprint. But in terms of what this means, I think it means, we can work together, which is great news. I think it's also that, but it's not just working together. We can come up with new ideas working together. We can move civilization forward. We're being held back right now, actually. We need to be able to push civilization forward by working together. Yeah. And then but more practically, we can see, another area I work on is trade facilitation, which is, it's a WTO topic, right? But what it involves is basically eliminating cross-border barriers. So we have unimpeded trade. And indeed, that is also one of the hallmarks of the Belt and Road Initiative, right? And I think the Belt and Road Initiative is responsible for opening up my eyes to these things.
Okay.
So the more we develop the Belt and Road Initiative, the more insights, the more revelations are going to become apparent. But a major feature of the Belt and Road Initiative and what the WTO is doing is trying to increase connectivity between, ultimately, the civilizations. And so that involves, as we know with the Belt and Road Initiative, that involves, railways, it involves roads. What we should understand, though, is that the three civilizations themselves had their own highways.
Okay.
They had their own ways in which everything was done. Did you know, for example, that between North India, there was a a route between North India, beginning in the Brahmaputra Valley in northeast India, going over what has become known as the Stillwell Road, after General Stillwell, to the Burma Road, which then connects with Kunming, and that just a few miles, 100 miles or so to the north, you encounter the Yangtze River.
Right.
Which at that point is called the Jinsha, the Golden Sand River, right? And at that point, that's right, exactly. And that is a clearly very navigable, large river even at that point. You can take that from that point on the Jinsha. You can take a boat and you can go all the way. It's an express route, all the way from there right to Shanghai.
Wow.
Wow.
Imagine in ancient times you could do that, and they did.
That's quite amazing. That's quite really, really amazing. I strongly resonate with what you said, and it really is. If there were more mission-driven, empathetic dialogues between civilizations, not just between East and West, but even within Asia, right? There's a lot of civilizational conversation could be done. It could actually create an ever important in an eon combination, which is going to be a truly win-win for us. I really find what you just pointed out, all those connections are quite important for every one of us to dig a little bit more deeper, to connect those connections, connect the dots. And you just mentioned about the river from North India, all the way back to Kunming and all the way back to Shanghai. Think about what a river can do, right? A river actually connects many things: culture, custom, people, and a soul, and many civilizational factors in the river, right? And aside the river. So I think we could really pay attention to those key factors you just mentioned.
And I want to mention too. I just wanted to interject there too, because it's not just the majestic, Yangtze River, but when you go over that hill, as it were, and go along the ancient Burma Road, you do not just encounter eventually the Yangtze, but you also encounter the Mekong, and the Mekong River will take you right into the heart of Southeast Asia. So you can see how these civilizations could interact with each other very, very expeditiously.
Profoundly. Yeah.
And of course, there's also the Irrawaddy River that's nearby, which also goes into Southeast Asia. So river transportation was extremely important. But what was also extremely important was sea transportation, including by boat and ship. So there were a lot of connections between India and Sunda, between Wu and or China and Sunda, Southeast Asia. And if you look at the maps, and I think I've sent you one of Sundaland, the rivers there that they have hypothesized existed, there is a river system on either side of the Sunda subcontinent that almost connect. And so it made it possible to, as it were, come down the Yangtze River, go to Suzhou, then come down through the South China Sea and connect with this river system and go go right to the center of the Sunda subcontinent, and then go across to the next river system, and then you're already in the Andaman Sea. And you're then on your way back to India. So I believe that there was a circular stream of traffic going on here that stimulated interchange, commerce, technological exchanges between these three civilizations through that mechanism of transportation. So I think it's quite remarkable. And of course, once you get into the Andaman Sea, then you go back and you come up the Ganges River, right? And so then you're back in India. So it's the river systems, and when combined with the sea the wonderful sea system of East Asia at that time are remarkable. I mean, the South China Sea has been in some ways characterized as the equivalent. It's the Eastern Mediterranean, right? Because there was a lot of intercourse going on between what I call Wu China and Sunda, or Southeast Asia at the time. And then on the other side, there was a lot of activity between Bharata and Sunda, Southeast Asia. So all of this was happening, but the rivers, as you've pointed out, were also incredibly important.
Right. Those are all amazing sources you just point out. Not only the maps, right, and the whole, also the resources, the books and maps, but also the rivers and ocean, and all these great factors could manifest. We have a lot to look into, to find those connections. So once we are back with curiosity, with those kind of great resources that could open a vast door for us to grow our curiosity. And once that get in, we could find many more interesting factors behind the cultures to lead to the truth, right? To lead to the truth. We really appreciate.
But can I just raise one more point here, Yin, that there is a corridor also that went from North India and connected the Mediterranean civilization, which was actually a Mediterranean Black Sea civilization in very, very ancient times, the what I call the Tethan civilization. And that corridor goes, really, it cuts across the southern part of the Caspian Sea, and then you encounter it's rivers. You encounter the Kura River, and then that almost connects, just a very short little tiny hop, and then you get onto the Phasis River, which goes to the ancient trading center of Colchis. Now, Brendan, Colchis, probably, you know Colchis, right? From Jason and the Argonauts.
Yes, exactly.
The Golden Fleece.
It took you a second, yes.
But I believe that actually the Golden Fleece wasn't a fleece at all. It was gold in the sense that it was worth money. It was Chinese silk. So they would go, that was a frequently used corridor, and it has been since very ancient antiquity, to take you to the Black Sea, and then from there you could go into the Mediterranean as well. So these are the corridors, and again, it is the Belt and Road Initiative that clues you in to corridors. You see?
Wow!
I love it.
I can only say wow.
I'm looking forward to our offline conversation about some of this.
Sure.
We should have much more episodes on this. I think it's ongoing topics. It will actually drive our audience, including myself, to get more curious about the whole, civilizational factors behind this whole One Belt and Road.
And I just want to make one last point here, too, or at least, and that is that what we do need to appreciate, saying that civilization only began in 3000 BC is really shortchanging humanity.
Sure.
And saying it only happened in the Middle East, in what is contemporary Iraq, that's a bit of a stretch. And if it's only 3000 BC, that's only like 160 generations of civilized human beings on the planet Earth.
Yeah. What happened before the previous extinctions and the previous history that's lost to sands of time.
Actually, and what I see, and as I've explained to Yin Yang, is that the defining feature of human civilization was the Ice Age. All right, and they never bring into the calculus, the existence of the Ice Age.
Right.
And I believe that it was because of the Ice Age that we developed human civilization, because it was almost an extinction level event.
Right.
And people had to come together, and they came together. They huddled together in the warmer climes, which happened to be, southern and eastern China, Southeast Asia, and India.
Right. That's the places that could survive. Yeah.
That is right. And because, the human species was really up against the wall, people worked together.
Right.
People worked together. But this is the thing. The Ice Age is a defining feature, and they won't go back because of the Ice Age. I mean, depending on where you were in the world, the Ice Age ended around 9,600 BC or BCE. So that is, that's in the West. That's for Europe when the ice sheets start moving back, right? And you have the great sea floodings occurring, which I believe destroyed in large measure the Tethyan civilization of the Mediterranean. It also destroyed in large measure the Sunda civilization of Southeast Asia. Wu was also heavily affected. I mean, Japan became separated from China at that time. It used to be a peninsula. So there were great changes that really produced a kind of collective amnesia, I think, for the human race as well. But the point is because they were such devastating body blows to humanity. But the point is that they won't go back that far. They will not go back beyond the end of the last Ice Age. But we're already now discovering archaeological sites that are in the last Ice Age, and we're finding that this is pretty sophisticated stuff. Whether you're in Turkey, right, which was ancient Anatolia, whether you are in Indonesia, which is part of Sundaland, whether you're off the coast of Taiwan, which was ancient Wu, China, they're finding things now that go back a long way.
Right.
You see, so and of course, part of this are what's important here is pyramids, right? Pyramids are extremely important. So there's just a tremendous amount that is relevant here to understanding. But what I am saying is that our civilization goes back before the end of the last Ice Age. And in fact, the three civilizations that I'm talking about, and the fourth one in the Mediterranean, that these were great civilizations that actually had possibly tens of thousands of years to develop.
I guess this whole conversation also is a great example to showcase how civilization could be super connected with many, many work contemporarily right now human beings are doing, including One Belt One Road, right? And Professor Dong, you have a paper argues that Belt and Road Initiative represent a challenge to the current dystopian Western dominant multilateral governance system, and really actually presents a historic opportunity for China to lead in this further development of the system, or more radically speaking, the development of an alternative governance system. So the whole thing is there's a lot of new factors to be taken into, including the civilizational one that I just mentioned and elaborate on. With that being said, really at this point, how could China communicate to the world on this initiative when it comes to paying attention to really getting more collaborators to understand the true meaning and behind this to move civilization forward? And how could China be cautiously working on in guarantee more people to get a win-win and guarantee success. Basically, it's like there's a lot of things need to be cautious about, right? If there's a lot of misunderstanding, there's media misrepresentation, and there's people with different agendas. But at this point, when civilization really need to work together instead of like splitting up, and what China can do to help this to. What China can do at this point when it comes to make things moving forward.
Yes, well, I think China has an incredible opportunity, a truly historic opportunity to provide an alternative vision. And of course, China is very well positioned to do that because in many ways, China is very different from the quote unquote West. And the West has its own internal conflicts at present. So, this is a wonderful opportunity for China, to provide an alternative vision and an alternative set of principles, alternative institutions, alternative doctrines, philosophies, which are not combative, that are not conflictual, but rather are cooperative, which is, of course, China's forte. That is the Chinese, certainly the internal Chinese way, is through, 合作 and 和谐. So,
合作和谐.
Right. So through cooperation and harmony. So there's a whole narrative here to discuss. And one of the things that I think is important to understand about China is that China puts a great deal of importance on being civilized and what civilization means. And we've had a discussion before on this, the idea that notions of ren, of enhui, right? Of 和谐, of li, the ideas of grace, of benevolence, of harmony, of proper etiquette and conduct. These are things that are completely lacking in our sort of Western, wasteland. You don't behave like that. Well, the point is, in China, that is the way you are expected to behave because that is what civilizations do. So leading as a civilization is extremely important, and I can assure you, India will join you on that basis. Because they stress civilization too. Because we are talking about the world's two longest continuously existing civilizations, China and India. So there is, I think, a lot of room here for India-China cooperation. In fact, I'm trying to promote that. I think you may be too, Yin-Ying, in some of your work. But I also think Southeast Asia has a very important role to play. In other words, this is the three civilizations sort of stepping up to the plate and starting to lead, because we don't have a civilization, right?
I felt that way when I visited Southeast Asia. I feel that the harmonious nature over there, and there's a lot of interesting social customs that could also connect with the Chinese culture and Chinese Ren and Li and harmony here. And I feel like when people work in peace instead of conflicts, and each people from different groups have different agendas, the world could much more to be able to move forward than just right now, suffering, make people suffer.
Absolutely. And I think China has a wonderful model. I referenced this earlier in terms of China having developed its own system of international relations that are completely different from those of the Westphalian system of Europe. Including, of course, the tributary state system, right? So, and the feature of the tributary state system, I think one of the key features of that system has been China behaving, again, as a civilization, right? And that countries around China are not being coerced into relationships with China. In other words, China is not expanding its influence through outward conquest, which, is actually incredibly barbaric. Not through outward conquest, but by inward attraction. Inward attraction.
That is an excellent place, because I realize we've had you for far more than our allotted time, and we're going to have you as a returning champion.
Back.
We'll have to have you back on, and you're holding up your belt from your previous award-winning match. This is a fascinating topic. I would love to discuss this when I pass through San Francisco at some point as well, if we could triangulate the vectors on that.
Sure. Absolutely.
Approximately, it may be too early days. I don't know where you are in your research. or if you're, deeply into the draft. I mean, approximately when do you think we might look for this book that we've been teasing a tiny bit?
Okay, well, I'm first going to be a little less ambitious and, do this in a Chinese way. In other words,
in other words, you're going to actually answer the question.
Evil eye, right? Step by step. No, step by step. And so, I mean, I do this incrementally. And so I want to first come out with an article on this.
Right.
A solid article on it.
Kind of plant your flag.
Exactly. I mean, because I have come up with other concepts which people have really, they've uprooted the flag and they've run with it. For example, I came up originally with the idea of the cyber or digital Silk Road. In Sanya, China, at a Center for China and Globalization conference in November of 2014, and of course that has really just taken off as the third road, right? So, but I want to do the same thing here with this. But again, all of this is because of what President Xi and what the Chinese leadership have done in terms of this profound vision that has been opened up by Belt and Road. So, we want to move this forward now, and then again, China can take the lead in terms of what this means for the three or the four civilizations and the partnerships that engenders. I mean, China is working on does have comprehensive strategic partnerships with a number of countries along the Belt and Road. But if China is now positioning itself as a lead civilization for Belt and Road, not just as a leading country, which is really a Western notion, the idea of Guojia, right? So as the civilization that is leading now, that is back on its feet and is leading as it has not done for a long time, bearing in mind that prior to the age of imperialism, China was the greatest civilization on the planet and had been for at least 2, possibly 4, possibly 8 millennia, so or beyond. So the point is, this is a wonderful time for China to then take that center ground as the lead civilization, and what that then means in terms of how it works with other countries like India, like Southeast Asia, like Europe. Or parts of Europe. So, and of course, if the United States is willing to behave itself, the United States can also be a part of this, right? So but it's heady times, and but it needs to be done in a systematic way.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Donald Lewis. We really appreciate your time and your insights, and I'm looking forward to being a little bit smarter once I read this article of yours. And we would love to have you back on the show once it's published.
Well, thank you very much.
Don. Really enjoyed the talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you both, Ying and Brendan. Thank you so much for having me on the show, and I look forward to being in touch and meeting, as it were, mian dui mian, face to face.
Absolutely,
in the
absolutely.
future.
Okay, thanks to Professor Don Lewis for the great talk, and to my co-host Ying Lee for her very nice introduction and work in the interview. Let me give you a few quick notes regarding Season 2, now that we're getting back on schedule after the Chinese New Year break. We had originally intended to drop 2 episodes a week in Season 2, as we mentioned previously, but given the realities of Ying and my travel schedules and of the busy nature of our desired show guests, we have decided to stick to doing 1 per week. We really like doing these longer form talks. We think that going in depth like this provides the most value for your time as well as ours and the guests. We have also been recording some shows with just one of us, either Ying or myself, as the host, in order to facilitate everybody's schedules and not miss a great opportunity to record in person with someone. That is really key. This one actually, I think, came out pretty well on Don's end from the Skype, but we would love to be able to do these interviews in person as much as possible. There's really something intangible that you get with being in the room with somebody and being able to sit there with them. So we're going going to do that as much as we can, even if it means that there's only one of us interviewing at a time. We'll still combine our efforts on these introductions and outros in different ways. We would love to hear from you. Let us know what you think about all this. Please visit us at howchinaworkspodcast.com, and you can give us feedback, find more guest information on our resources page, or just have a look around and learn more about the show and us and our guests. Ying is back in Beijing as I speak, but as we are releasing this, I have just arrived in Paris for 3 weeks for some movie business stuff, and we are going to be bringing you more great guests from around the world soon on How China Works. See you next week.